I'm very much familiar with that, and it's certainly a story worth telling. He started off in Georgetown, Kentucky, at a Presbyterian church there. It was 5 years in Farmville, and then came here to Second Presbyterian. And Farmville Church always had an opinion about the ministering. Don't go there. They drink at session meetings. They're socialites. And that was true. They met in homes, and beer was served, and that went away the first meeting. But I was 5 years old, and I have the longest tenure membership of anybody except Martha Glenn Martin. She's 2 years older than I am, and I think she probably joined then. But I've been associated with the church for 83 years. It was just a normal childhood. At the outset, I was a new kid on the block and got a lot of attention, but you just went to church. It wasn't a question about Sunday school and church. You were going. And they were pleasant people, and it was a lot bigger church. Church had about 800 members at the time. And I enjoyed it, but it didn't really become a meaningful experience until I got to high school. And junior high school, the teachers in Sunday school were dedicated folk. But what really happened was when they got to high school, Bev Fitzpatrick, who was a pillar of the church, taught the senior boys, and his wife taught the senior girls. They didn't let us meet together because they knew what we would be thinking. And Bev was a city judge and just a marvelous guy, but he used international Bible lessons, and whatever the text was, I always managed to work it around to don't drink because we were just all thinking about that. And he became a personal friend. We took up two collections, one from the church and one for us. And as soon as we got enough money, Bev would take us all out to Archie's Lobster House for dinner. And we had the money. And he was going to have pecan pie, whether they had it or not. But he said, we're going to order everybody pie when we go in because they'll run out. But we knew the underlying lesson was that he really cared about who we were and what we were learning. And so much so that 30 years later, I ran into him at a very fancy cocktail deal in Hotel Roanoke with a martini in my hand. And I was going to put it in my pocket, but the pockets were so shut. But he looked at it, looked at me, and we went on and had our visit. But he was my second father. We had a director of religious education, it was called then, Mary Bigham, and we met on Sunday nights after dinner. We had our dinners at church. That was kind of a social gathering place. The ladies would bring their evening dates to church to the youth meeting. There were about 60 of us in that group. Somebody was in charge of the program that Miss Bigham directed. She was like a mother away from home. She was one of those ladies that you just knew and respected. And we had a church hostess at the time, Ms. Macy, and you've heard Ms. Macy's stories. She was the cook and chief bottle washer and planner, and she recruited ladies from the church to come help serve at these meals. The young people's meal was not a big deal, but at its peak, they were serving about 1,000 meals a month because the men of the church and the women, the young adults, all of that had their own programs. That was an important meeting too, the young people's meeting. We all went to summer camp at least twice, and we'd have a good group that would go. There'd be a Montgomery Presbyterian contingent, and then there would be a statewide. The men of the church, that's a big change because the men of the church routinely had 100 in the John Knox class. And the Sunday school attendance in that time, this is post-war, um, would always run between 500 and 600 every Sunday. And church began to grow a lot then. There was not much of growth during the war, but they had plans after the war. They built a chapel, which was the first building program from the original plan. The chapel, we had a capital funds campaign, $240,000 to build the chapel. And changed the nature of the church in that they used to have a Wednesday night prayer meeting. That went away. But we had a Thursday noon service that my dad conducted, and it attracted a lot of men from downtown. They would walk up here because Miss Bessie was fixing breaded veal cutlets or whatever. We'd have 100 or so at that, and that went away when Bill Klein came. Sanctuary service was broadcast every 2 weeks on WSLS TV. And that went on for a couple of years. And then television stations realized some revenue here that we're not collecting. And they cut it out, or they priced it right out of what we could afford. When I went to college at Davidson, which is Presbyterian school, and 2 years mandatory Bible, Old Testament, New for the first 2 years, compulsory chapel 3 days a week, religious emphasis. We came every year, and they'd bring Jonathan Whale from England or whomever that was so far above our heads. Billy Graham came, Chuck Hummel came, and the dean of the chapel at Duke always came. And we worked crossword puzzles and things while these pearls were being passed out. And I think, like most of my preacher friends' sons, went through a period of not necessarily estrangement, but not really committed to what we were having to do. We were noisily neglectful, except at Vespers. But the chapel, somebody would mention how fortunate we were to have Woodrow Wilson as an alum, and they would all boo that. And the word got around that my dad spoke at Vespers one night, and I was very nervous about that, but they treated him with respect. When you finish college, you have a whole different set of regulations and rules. For me, it was grad school in medicine. We joined a church in Atlanta where I was going to school. And then in Charlottesville, I was active in the church there and kind of got back on track with what this might really mean. Because by that time, you'd seen enough of life to know that you really were not in control of the world or any of it. So it was a big change when I got to Charlottesville. I went to Westminster Church there. This church was socially very, very much interested in social justice and marched in Selma and the whole deal. And I was not very much aware of that, which is a surprise because I was in Atlanta at the worst of the civil rights conflagration. And I just didn't, I was too busy to really think about what was happening. And then when I got in a church where, well, this is what's happening, and you on board or not? And I got on board with that. And that was where I really began to see how the churches I had attended all these years had a different focus. And that was the focus where the program hit the ground, and you needed to know how to respond to that. And I would say that I came into Westminster thinking about these things, being thoughtful, but I left there having been a deacon there. I left there realizing that I had a mission that I really hadn't thought about. And I was interested in inner city ministry. And Davidson colleague, Ben Sparks, came to Roanoke to set up the Southeast Community Center. And I had not met him, but I wrote him before I came and told him that I hoped we would be allies, and we were. I was on the founding board of Ram House, which started off with the surplus food program and then grew into what it is today. And I joined civic clubs to be socially active, and I set about to reform the Downtown Kiwanis Club, which was all the shakers and movers in town. And they were older men. But they were the leadership of downtown Roanoke. But they were all middle-aged white guys. And Arnold was center, who was a friend of mine and Jewish, was a member too of Kiwanis Club. We thought, well, we'll bring these guys up to speed. So we started inviting black guys to meetings. We had black mayor at the time and black superintendent of schools. And we brought them, and they were coolly but cordially received. And when we began to talk to them about integrating our club, they were not interested. So we have our own clubs that we like. Thank you for the invitation, but this is not a place that we feel to be, which jumps 40 years ahead, 50 years to you and Bill Lee, because we tried all these things to get in the neighborhood across the street from our church. There are a lot of people over there who don't know where the next meal's coming from. We've done everything we could to try to get that started. In Salem, where I was a member for a while, when I lived in Salem, there was a black lady who served Thanksgiving dinners to anybody who wanted to come. She did it on her own, and it grew into a big crew. And we didn't have anything like that. So when I was on the session, I said, Rescue Mission, Salvation Army, all these people in Roanoke are downtown feeding people, and we're not doing anything. Well, let's bring our turkey dinners to the church and bring a couple of extra turkeys and put the word in. Anybody that wants to eat, come, no strings attached. And we had 3 people come. We ate our dinners, and it was fun. We learned some stuff from retirement homes and from blacks, and it began to grow. And then when I moved back to Roanoke, it continued. And there was a big article in the paper 2 or 3 years ago about Second Presbyterian and the Thanksgiving dinners, which had grown to 200 people. I don't know how many of them don't really care. How many of them got a message and came and joined the church?
Yeah.
But they saw who we were, and we saw who they were. And Bill Lee and you have so glad that you've continued the black and white, and hopes that we'll be beginning to see more diversity. After I grew up, church really became so much more to me. It was not stone and steel, wood and wonder. It was the room that I had spent more time in than any other room. We were married there. Our children were baptized there. And the only single child that was not in a worship service, which is what we do, but we were off to Germany the next day, and this baby girl had not been baptized, so I did that. I look on my whole experience in the church, and of course, I was chairman of the committee that called George, and that was the best committee that I was ever on, not because of me, but because of the whole ambience. Bill Klein was greatly loved and a very close personal friend of mine. But Helen Fitzpatrick was the chairman of the nominating committee, and she nominated her son, Bronis, Stuart Robercombe, Paul Anderson, Betty Lisco, Jody Ayers, and Stacy Potter, and me. And I was delighted. I didn't say anything to anybody about it. Whereas one member told me that he told Helen, you kept me on that committee no matter what. And you can guess who that was. But it was so much paperwork involved in that. It takes a year to get all of it in place before you can really begin to do the work of looking for a new pastor. And George's first time we looked at it, the two members that went with me were standing in the parking lot on the Saturday night, wondering how this would be, and took us to the airport on Sunday morning, and both of them said, well, it's done. We don't need to go anywhere else. And I said, yes, we do. We can't just do that. And we've got to be broader vision. Well, one thing led to another, and we were kind of at a stuck place, and we went back to hear George. And this time we were able to see the future, and he was too, which he could not have done at the first time. And he was 38. My dad was 38. Bill Klein was 38. Spencer Edmonds, the previous one from my dad, was young. And they all, the last three all stayed 26 years. And so we told, and George, 38, said, yeah, this 26-year sentence, no time off for good behavior. And Ede, his dad, was the interim. I would check in with Ede from time to time, but I never told him we were looking at George. And then I began to hear more and more people coming to us and say, well, he's the guy. We got to have Ede. I don't know whether it's still polity or not that an interim cannot assume the full-time pastor. Not allowed in. And I said, well, we just can't do that. And I said, I think he's in a new phase of his ministry anyway. So when I got up to present the nomination at the congregational meeting, that's one congregational meeting, everybody stayed. And introduced myself, and I said, I am chairman of the committee because I know how to operate a computer and I can type. I am unemployed. And one other thing, I'm the oldest. So that's why I'm chairman. And I complimented the committee for how good they had been. And then I said, after this 2-year work, we have found the man that we believe God intends to lead us for the next time. I didn't say 26 years. And I said, you will recognize what I'm getting ready to tell you as quite unusual. We will call, with your approval, George Charles Anderson Ede Stone. And that right went, what? There was this gasp. And everybody was so delighted. And we went through the secret ballot, and it was 348 to 1. And I knew who the one was because he had already told me there was somebody at Duke that he wanted. But I never had any doubt that he would continue the work that we were doing. I did not know that his vision would be so broad, and that's what we needed. And by that time, I was seeing what my life was going to be like, and I was going to stay in Roanoke, which I did. I stayed active in the church until my health began to give me. As you will find out, your world begins to contract. And from being master of the universe type of guy, it gets smaller and smaller until it comes down to a room, literally. And what am I going to do here? I've been here 8.5 years now. And started off in independent living and continued to be active with church. But I can't do that anymore. And the thing that gives purpose is there 300 or 400 people that I'm exposed to, about half of which are staff. And they are such good people. Staff with which I come in contact the most are support staff, not administrative leaders. And they're all bloody, and they're all young, and they're all caring and loving once they find out that you're not Mr. Man. And I came in here, and everybody's Dr. Hollingsworth this, Dr. that, and the staff had been taught, I feel sure, call him doctor. So said, no, it's Hayden, and that's why I wear the little badge, because that was another life, and I want to be part of yours now. I look back and see that my life has been blessed with beyond deserving. And I found out that where I made some really wrong decisions, I've been forgiven for that. And I've been loved by people who had reason not to love me or to change the way my relationship was. But the hardest thing here that I had not anticipated is there is an emotional case built around all of us, not you. You've got a case, but it's not hardened into stone yet, because we're just not in the same place that we're used to being. And I found this the hardest move of all, which was unanticipated by me. And the church has helped immensely with that. The televising of the live stream is so important. And George had been out a number of times to visit. Elizabeth comes a lot, and Ben does too. So we all feel that connection with the church. And as I mentioned, the steel and stone is not what it is. It's the last room I will be in. One of the first that I was ever in. And I know where the end is now. That's one thing about getting a diagnosis. You can kind of figure, well, what am I going to do with this? And if you don't decide what's going to be done, then it will be decided for you. And I'm getting more and more comfortable with that. I wrote a series of books about my childhood 50 years ago for my girls. It ends where I leave home. I planned on picking it up for the rest of my life, but that never happened. I wrote a newspaper column for 10 years, and that kind of took care of my writing needs. But I was a semi-professional storyteller after my retirement, and I got to where I really liked that. And all the gestalt of my life has been focused on one thing, and that is doing the best I can. The good I remember with so much gratitude. The other thing is that I learned to deal with tragedy, as you all do, because tragic things happen. Cut around and look at that picture on the wall there. It's a picture of a very angry ocean. You can see the curvature of the earth. There are two people in this little canoe. There are no paddles, there are no sails, and the woman sitting in the back has her hands in her lap, and the guy probably has his hands up. My daughter painted that picture in a class for cancer patients, and she said, "That's me in the boat." But that's Jesus up front. And she taught all of us in our family so much about handling what we knew was a death sentence from the first day. And that picture has meant so much to me. In her funeral, her memorial service, her partner had an insert printed in the bulletin. That's been 9 years now, but it's that was such a gift to be able to let go and let it happen and know that it's going to be okay. No, you couldn't. And I taught in the medical school at Virginia as a very low level um, physician. And I learned then that their focus was different from mine. Um, they were all super minded, focused on this part of the DNA. And by God, they're going to change it. And when was in the Army, I was coming back to an academic job. I knew that. But in the um, Army personnel are different. Uh, you have to answer to different master in that. And the medical officer, you're just one of the guys like the PX. Um, we'll tell you what we want as your patients, and you by God better do it. Um, and that's when I saw that the practice, and I was much better uh, caregiver than teacher because I was too close to the patient and the house staff around me. But I wasn't going to give them the authority that they needed. That was an epiphany where I knew that I needed to be more in the caregiving business. And I had national offices in my specialty, but it took me a while to learn I don't need this. And you got awards and stuff like that. It's a nice vindication that you're meeting some needs. But I've been retired forever. I lost most of my vision uh, when I was 59. And so I had to retire. That's when I started writing. But I run into people now. Last week, somebody told me some crazy story that I had found out and magic happened. Don't remember any of that. But I got over some of the ego needs that I would have had to develop if I were really going to be a first line player in academics. Well, I was not the big magician in the sky. I prayed a lot about a lot of things and none had happened. But I learned to change my prayer today is I'm in a situation of change and I know what the end's going to be. Give me the strength to make the most out of it and don't cure this or make it different. And I learned to see God in all things, nature and relationships. And the only thing that really counts in my life now is a loving relationship. That's all that's left. And that's the most important thing. I knew coming in here, I was going to need to work on it. And it's taken time, but I'm on the way. And I don't ever expect to have the kind of relationships that I built my life around, except for my girls. I hope to see it become diverse When my dad came into church, 50% of the church walked to church. They were in the Old Southwest, and gas was rationed. But now there are a handful that live within walking distance, if that many. I would like to see people that come because they feel that they're accepted